In today's episode of The Shadows Project, we speak to British politician, broadcaster, filmmaker and writer George Galloway about the first in his series of novels entitled Queensway.
Hi. Hello. Nice.
Hello.
Do we call you George or Galloway?
George, please.
George, yeah. Hi,
George,
nice to meet you, George.
I haven't got my knighthood yet.
Yeah, Sir George. Yeah. we can start now. We can call you Sir George now if you want, all the way through.
Wait till I've saved Scotland from the SNP.
Yeah, George, I heard you were going to vote Conservative this time.
Yeah, first time in my life.
Yeah.
It's just my bad luck. I live in a place where it's the Conservatives or the SNP. So what can you do?
Yeah. I'm with Terry, so we just say hello to Terry because he's going to cope.
Hi, Terry.
Hiya, George. Made up to see you in person. Is that background from the show, the Mother of All Talk Shows? Same background?
I don't know what background we've got. It's a green screen.
Oh, okay. Yeah, it's just the city of Edinburgh. It looks like Edinburgh.
It's Edinburgh, yeah. It's Edinburgh.
Ah, okay.
Beautiful.
Okay, George. Yeah, I've just finished reading your book, literally like 20 minutes ago. Yeah.
Okay, well, it's very slim, and
Yeah.
the next one's out in the next couple of weeks. It's called Black Lake. It's the sequel. It'll be a 5-parter, 8-parter, maybe. That's why it's priced at £5.
Yeah. Well, that my first question was going to be, when's the next one coming out? Because it ends up
It's at the printers now, literally at the printers now. Yeah. So as soon as the printer delivers the first batch, they'll be on sale. It's called Black Lake.
Black Lake, yeah.
And it's set in West Bromwich.
Okay. Can you just give us a brief outline of this book? Because we could give you a brief outline, but obviously you can say it a bit better than us, yeah?
Thank you. Yeah, well, it's called Queensway, first of all, because of Whiteley's, the former department store in the Queensway area in Bayswater. And I'll explain that in a minute. It's a counterfactual history, which presupposes that Hitler actually made it across the channel. And he invaded us and subjugated some parts, but not all, of Britain. And it examines what would have happened next in those circumstances. So it presupposes we didn't win the Battle of Britain. It presupposes that Dunkirk was a failure. And it presupposes that we were betrayed by some admirals who were actually real in real life, real history, who were sympathetic to the Nazi cause. And they ensured that Hitler got an expeditionary force across the channel. And it then examines who would have collaborated with the new Nazi power in Britain and who would have resisted. And the first thing you need to know is that the promise that Mr. Churchill made, that not until we are lying here on the floor in Downing Street, choking on our own blood, we will never surrender, without giving the plot away. He meant that. But not all of the British ruling class meant that. In fact, quite a few of the British ruling class were very sympathetic to the ideas of fascism, and they were even more sympathetic to their own interests. So once the power shifted, Hitler was around Whitehall, they shifted their allegiance in the hope that it would profit them, and it did profit some of them in my book. But the best of the British, the working class overwhelmingly, but even some of the ruling class, and Churchill among them, were determined to defend our island, and they did. So it's the story. The first book is Our Darkest Hour. It's called The Darkest Hour in this Queensway series. Sees the conquering of London and some other parts of the country by the Nazis, but they are thin on the ground. So they are unusually dependent on the British fascists, who were around, of course, at the time, led by Sir Oswald Mosley, who becomes the Prime Minister in my book. But they were dependent on them because they couldn't really spare the troop numbers to garrison Britain fully. Because Dunkirk having failed, that meant there were 400,000 British soldiers, many of them at large in France, some of them having been captured and had to be controlled, but many others at large and beginning to form a resistance to Nazi rule in France rather than to surrender themselves. So you get, I hope, a whiff of the story from that answer.
Yeah, like when I was reading the book, it's like fast-paced, you know, really, it's easy to understand, yeah, within itself, but there's lots of subtext and lots of things that took me away from the book. And it led me to like a documentary about the guy you mentioned, Oswald Mosley, called the Patriot Game, a documentary that you made. So I watched it.
That's right.
As I was reading the book, it made me backtrack a little bit and led me to this documentary and some other things about you. And I found it very interesting in this way because for like young teenagers and people who read this, you know, like Animal Farm, for example, it's like an easy book to read in many ways, but it's got lots of depth to it. It's got lots of subtext and other things that it can lead on to. So when I went away to this, I started to watch that documentary about the fascism in England, and it actually shocked me. I didn't know, you know, it was so big. And then leading right up to modern day with like Tommy Robinson and the English Defence League and all these things. So
well, fascism hasn't gone away. We don't have the problem with it in Britain that they do in some European countries. In fact, Britain's the only country in the whole of Europe that doesn't have fascists in its parliament and in its town halls. So we have something to be proud of in that. And that's partly because we did stand up to Hitlerism. We were the last man standing before the Americans entered the war, before the Soviet Union entered the war. We were standing alone. And that is something I think deeply embedded in the British psyche. We don't like fascists and jackboots and their black uniforms and all the rest. We recoil from that. But back in the 1930s and around the time, 1940, 41, when this first volume is taking place, there were plenty of fascists in Britain because capitalism had completely failed. In the 1930s, you had conditions of mass depression, not just mass unemployment, but mass depression, people hungry, unable to find enough food, unable to find medical care, and of course, many millions out of work in a time when there was no welfare state. So the different ideologies were competing for the anger of the mass of the population, not just in Britain, but in Europe, and principally, of course, in Germany. That's how fascism came to power in Germany, because the people were desperate. And fascism offered them, first of all, a pretend solution, but it also offered them pretend guilty people. It said, this is all happening because of the Jews. If only we could get rid of the Jews, we could rebuild Germany. That was the appeal of fascism. And of course, in every European country that came under the jackboot, there were significant numbers of local fascists. Anne Frank, for example, wasn't betrayed by the Germans. She was betrayed by Dutch fascist sympathizers of the German occupation. Quisling in Norway was a real person. We now use that word. Someone is a Quisling. But Quisling was a real man. And he in the Scandinavian setup was a little Hitler. as Mosley was or wanted to be a little Hitler here. And in my book, he does indeed get the premiership. And of course, we have another twist. The king, having abdicated over his relationship with the American divorcee Wallace Simpson, is basically kicked off the throne, but the Nazis put him back on again. And here's the first of many double entendres. One of the reasons why it's called Queensway is because Hitler, before the war, long before the war, identified the Whiteley's department store, which was a rather magnificent building, as the building he wanted when he conquered Britain to have as the Nazi Party headquarters. But the second reason it's called Queensway is because the new Queen, Queen Wallace Simpson, the American, is a significant figure in the story, because she, both her and her husband are fascist sympathizers, but she is actually a proper Nazi, and so she plays a more and more significant role in the events as each volume goes on.
Yeah, because when the king returns, he doesn't return to like streets full of people cheering him. He returns kind of like sneaked into the country almost. Yeah,
yeah, like a thief in the night.
Yeah,
and the proper king and his family, including our now Queen Elizabeth, they sail to safety beyond the seas in the Dominions, which in this case means Canada. So the actual royal family are safe in Canada, but the pretend royal family have been installed by the Nazis in Buckingham Palace. And there's lots of action will eventually take place in subsequent volumes around that.
I'm just thinking of the recent Netflix series I've watched, The Crown. I don't normally watch type of thing, but there's a couple of episodes there where the King Edward comes back and he tries to ingratiate himself into some kind of business sector. He goes to see different parliamentary groups, different businesses, different organisations to try and get a foothold back in Britain. Well, basically at the end of the episode, the Queen says, "No, I'm sorry," and then they cut to the end credits. Edward being shown to be a Nazi sympathiser, him walking around with the Nazi uniform on, doing his Nazi salute.
Yeah,
and that's obviously it's a fact. You know, it's a fact. At the end, they showed her that. But I know the show's been criticised as if to say there should be a warning on this. You know, that this is drama only. It's not real. A lot of it is real.
Yes, absolutely, and that certainly is real. Edward had to be sent to the Bahamas for the duration because he was caught illicitly communicating with the enemy. There's, of all the counterfactual facts in my book, that's actually the most easily proven. That if Hitler had conquered us, he would have been put back on the throne as a kind of quisling king.
I was just thinking about the Churchill character, but the Churchill character made me like laugh out loud because it's very, you can almost like feel his responses like they're very real, because Churchill's like stuck in the mines. He's operating from the mines in Wales.
Yeah, it's really it's meant to be just about the most unlikely thing that could possibly happen, because Churchill was hated by the miners, and he hated the miners' unions.
Well, I like his clothing. He's dressed in like a boiler suit.
In a boiler suit, which is
and then there's a scene where he's arguing, he's fighting with a miner, and the miner's like saying, you know, you may be like the big dog upstairs, but down here, you know, you're under my control, because he's trying to smoke a cigar.
Under the ground, in a coal
mine.
Well, that is exactly the kind of thing he would have done.
Yeah.
So although it seems extraordinarily unlikely, if you think about it, it's a pretty good hiding place.
Yeah.
After all, the Nazis hadn't conquered the valleys. They were in Cardiff Castle, but they hadn't conquered the valleys, which are very difficult terrain. The valleys were, in any case, almost exclusively miners, and the miners were the avant-garde of the British working class. They were the most class-conscious, militant section of the British working class, and the communists were stronger in the valleys than in any other part of Britain. So they held all the positions in the miners' union at that time. So actually, it was a very good place to hide him. He's under the ground, a mile underneath, and he's surrounded by people that don't like him, but they like Nazism even less.
Yeah.
And so they're stuck with him because they know that he has the legitimacy. He is the prime minister, and he did mean it when he said, "We will never surrender." And this notion of the British not surrendering is linked with Churchill forevermore. And it has the benefit of being true. Whatever other bad things that Churchill did, and he did many, the one thing he got right was that we had to stand up to Hitler. We could never make a surrender peace with Hitler. And his own foreign secretary, Lord Halifax, was openly intriguing with the Nazis through the Italian embassy in Rome, the Italian embassy in London. He was openly treating with Mussolini to try and broker a separate peace between Britain and Hitler. But Churchill would have none of it. And of course, when his voice, because people think he's dead, you see, in the book. People think he's disappeared, so people think he must be dead. So when they finally hear his voice, I'll not explain exactly how they hear it, but it's rather ingenious, I think.
Yeah, it's brilliant.
When they finally hear his voice and know that he is alive and leading the resistance, that is a pretty electric moment, I think.
There's a great line when he quotes somebody, I can't remember who he quoted. He's got like the boiler suit on, and the guy basically says, "But your hands are soft," yeah? And he said, "My hands are soft, but my will is made of reinforced steel," or something, yeah? I don't know who made that quote.
I actually think that that's true. You know, obviously I'm not a Churchill supporter politically, and I'm acutely aware, as someone of Irish background, someone who represented more people from the from the Indian subcontinent, what is now India, Pakistan, Bangladesh. I represented more of these people in Parliament than anyone else in the history of Britain. So I'm acutely aware of Churchill's faults. But I'm also aware, as too many people on the left are not, that but for Churchill, we'd be conducting this conversation in German. Except, of course, we wouldn't be conducting it at all, because we'd be dead, almost certainly, or never have been born. So that's pretty important. That's a pretty important caveat or qualification to criticism of Churchill. I think that I've tried to paint him as I think he was, warts and all, a pretty great figure, a pretty immense historical figure.
Made me want a cigar afterwards. I don't know why.
Yeah, well, me too. I smoked cigars for 35 years.
Yeah,
I stopped 6 years ago, so even talking about him smoking that cigar takes me back.
So I've got lots of things to ask you in that, but I'll just let Terry step in.
Joe, I was going to mention that you've just been talking about. There seems to be a lot of material there for non-fiction work. Looking at your bibliography, quite a wide range, but going back about 16 years since you had a previous non-fiction piece of work, have you thought of using this material?
Actually, this is my first work of fiction.
Novel. Yeah.
And this is my second, which is my children's book, Red Malacca, which is The Good Pirate. Red Malacca, The Good Pirate. So I'm basically branching now into fiction. And that it has its challenges. I mean, obviously, in my head, I have millions of facts that I know very well, and I can write about them without a moment's research. But if you're writing fiction, particularly counterfactual historical fiction, well, you need to know where the military units were. You need to know which regiments were involved. You need to know the geography and topography of Britain that the Nazis are trying to control and so on. So it's actually quite out of my normal comfort zone and it's therefore harder to do. Whereas I could sit down and write you a book about Tony Blair right now. I'd be able to do it.
The challenge of it then, George.
Verbally from the top of my head. But this is more difficult. No, in the past, I've written really, I suppose my book on the Ceausescus, which I produced within a few months of the downfall of the Ceausescus in Romania. I did go there immediately after the revolution. The smoke was still rising, and the corpses of the Ceausescus were scarcely buried. But again, although it was historical, it was clearly not fiction. This is different. But I've written about Fidel Castro. I've written about Neil Lennon, the erstwhile Celtic manager. I've had quite a varied output. That's right.
Did you get to meet Fidel Castro, George?
I've spent hundreds of hours with Fidel Castro. I'm very honored to be able to say, and I hope my book, The Fidel Castro Handbook, reflects that. I had access to his family albums, so the pictures in the book are quite stunning, many of them rare, some of them never seen before. Fidel Castro was the greatest man I ever met by a country mile. He was a truly titanic figure. I argue the man of the century, certainly the post-war century.
Yeah. So some of your other work, that you see, when I've watched your Oxford Union talks, you often get some like spotty teenager, who's basically they don't have all the information, because it's very difficult if you're talking to somebody like you to argue with you or to have a real opinion without, you're going to lose basically, because for example, Tunisia, you lived in Tunisia. Yeah, you were the driver of the Tunisian leader, and all these other countries, Fidel Castro, and you've met all these great leaders, and you know them personally in a way that you can call them friends. And then you come back to England, and there's lots of misinformation, or lots of do you know what I mean? People know like a snippet of something, and the go-to thing nowadays is that as soon as somebody disagrees with you, you call them a racist or you call them a homophobe. Yeah. And that's what, even in Oxford, like the elite level of education in Britain, that's what people do straight away. If you disagree with them or they have different political opinions, you're a racist. Yeah. How much of this sort of do you include this in the book when you have these thoughts in your head? People like Jacqueline Smith or somebody, or people in Oxford, sneering at them a little bit.
Yeah, it's a very good point. I don't consciously, but unconsciously, of course, I must. We carry the reminder of every glove that landed on us, as the song says. So, unconsciously, I must. I should say that a spotty-faced teenager at Oxford ought to be a little smarter than some of them were. Yeah. I mean, Oxford is supposed to be one of the premier universities in the whole world, and sometimes I'm amazed how stupid some of the people at these meetings were. People should look, by the way, at them on YouTube. They are mega. They have got millions of views for a reason. But I think what you just said can be summed up in the old adage, a little knowledge is dangerous. People who've got a little knowledge about something, but really not very much, imagine because of their little knowledge that they are qualified to make the most sweeping misstatements and misjudgments. And as you say, or you imply, to do that to me when I know the full picture is, well, it can be dangerous.
Yeah. I mean, I wasn't saying like you're always right. You know, it's difficult to know if you haven't got the full arguments yet. But they, like you said, they.
No, I'm not always right. I was wrong once. I think it was 1978 or 79. But
that's what I was going to say. Have you ever been wrong? Yeah. So your grandfathers fought in World War II, yeah?
Both of them, yes, both in the same regiment, though they didn't know each other. In the Black Watch, in the Highland Division of the 8th Army under Montgomery. They both fought at El Alamein. They fought with Montgomery all the way to Italy and through Italy. They both fought at Monte Cassino, one of the most terrible battles of the war, and yet they never met each other. And the daughter of one married the son of the other, and I'm the result.
So this like when you were writing this book, did you have this in mind, like the influence of this, like in the shadows of your past, sort of?
Well, the war is very much more important to me than it would be to somebody your age. I was born when Churchill was Prime Minister. Imagine. I was born in the very month that wartime rationing ended. I grew up playing in bomb shelters, which were in the back courts of all the tenement buildings. The war damage from the bombing, the German bombing, was visible throughout my childhood. And the world that I grew up in was absolutely determined by the war, by what happened in the war and who won the war, the division of Europe into the Cold War, and so on. These were all direct results of the Second World War. So it was very much more significant for me. But I would argue it's also significant for you, even if people your age don't always wholly grasp that. And so in these novels, I am trying deliberately to introduce people who are not my age, but younger, into what nearly happened. It's really important, this. My counterfactual proposition is not fantastic at all. If the RAF had not won the Battle of Britain, and they only just won it, then Hitler would have invaded us, and the collaborators would have collaborated, the resistors would have resisted. It very nearly happened. It's not like fiction that I landed on the moon or on Mars. This very nearly happened.
This is why I like books like this, because they're accessible, so like, if you don't know all these things, it's accessible, but then it leads you down a rabbit hole to other information, to the real facts, makes you think sort of provocative in this way. But yeah, it leads you to find out who Oswald Mosley was and all these other people. And then leading up to, even there was a guy in your documentary 2 years ago, I can't remember his name, Martin Webster, yeah. And so people exist nowadays.
The National Front,
yeah, the National Front. And so people think this has gone away. And then you see people like Martin Webster, and you're sitting there, and you have their 4 children.
I have five mixed race children.
At the time, like two Arab children and two
Arabs and three Indonesians.
Yeah.
It was only four at that time, but
yeah.
it's now five.
Yeah.
We've got a new baby. But you're right. I had to sit there while he told me that he was going to send my children back. They've never been anywhere else.
This is what I was going to say. Do you ever like just want to get physical with people like this, or do you just
no? He's too old.
Stay calm, you know.
He was too old to get physical with. No, I mean, I actually, I was glad that he was talking that way, because it would tell the people that were watching just what fascism really is.
Mm-hmm.
It is an ideology or a nostrum of racial superiority. Even though he was hardly a sort of master race type himself, he was a little fat guy, but he really did believe that he was racially superior to my children, for example, or to, I don't know, Eric Bailly, or any of the great black athletes, or the great black figures in commerce and science and literature and so on. He thinks he's superior to them. That's the madness of fascism, isn't it?
Yeah.
First of all, the idea that anyone is racially superior to anyone else, despite all evidence to the contrary. But the people that tend to feel that way, like Hitler, like Webster, are themselves physically and intellectually, you know, pipsqueaks, dwarves.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and then you get people like the guy in Oxford calling you a racist with his Israeli flag. Just
you've got to laugh. You've got to laugh, really.
Yeah, crazy. When sometimes I'm speaking to writers and, you know, different people every week, I feel like I'm in the TV show, you know, Quantum Leap.
Yes.
He's jumping into other people's lives. And I just started this, like last month, these writer chats to speak to different people. And then
Good for you. You've done very well.
Yeah, it's nice, man. It's brilliant. Up to George Galloway already. Sir George Galloway.
Yeah.
So, yeah, I read that you like boxing. Would you ever write a boxing book? Because you've had some great champions from like Ken Buchanan. And
that's a good point. I did once prepare a series of boxing documentaries, but the commission died in the end, so they were never made. But I think the story of boxing in Britain is a great story. I used to be associated with the Repton Amateur Boxing Club in East London, which is the kind of mecca of boxing in London. Some of the greatest fighters came out of there. Of course, it's completely changed now. In the 30s, 40s, it was white, including Jewish boxers by the score coming out of there. Now it's Asian kids, Bengalis, Pakistanis, and so on. But the Repton's got the stamp on them, made in the Repton. But yeah, when I was a kid, I was a boxer. Yeah. But I was also a budding Romeo. And I decided at about the age of 17 that cauliflower ears and a flat nose was probably going to hold me back on the dance floor. So I gave it up, but I've never lost my love for the game.
Yeah, it's amazing. Okay, so I don't want to take up too much of your time because I'm very very appreciative that you give us this time, because you got a talk show on Russian TV.
Yeah, it's on Sunday nights, called the mother of all talk shows. It's it's been going best part of 20 years now. First of all on Talk Sport, then on an American radio station, WBAI, then on Talk Radio, now free to air. You can watch it on YouTube, on Twitter, on Facebook. You can listen to it on SputnikNews.com. But however you watch or listen to it, You'll be part of a family of nearly 1 million people every week, nearly 1 million people every week. That's more than any other political show in Britain by many factors, many times. And you'll find it is an open university. It's called the Open University of the Airwaves, the mother of all talk shows, 7 o'clock every Sunday night. I hope you tune in.
Brilliant. Will do.
Will do.
Okay. For now, that'll be it. I'd love to have you on again. Maybe if
anytime.
With
my next book, you can have me back on.
Yeah, definitely.
Maybe we get someone like Tommy Robinson on, so you can have a fight with him.
All the best, lads.
Thanks, George.
Okay, thank you very much, George. Thank you.
Cheers.
Bye.
Thank you.
Bye now.